Okay, we're going to tie a baby bass zonker. This is Skip Morris's favorite zonker pattern, and it's taken from his book Morris on Tying Flies, published in 2006. This is a pattern that was developed by a gentleman named Don Byford. And the weighting of this fly is done two different ways. Skip Morris likes to weight it using this lead-free wire, or you can use a lead adhesive backed foil to give you a shaped body. If you use the wire, you just wrap from basically the point of the hook to a space behind the eye that's about two sizes behind the eye, two eye sizes back, and then you just build a thread bump on both ends of this wire to keep it from sliding around. You're not too worried about building a taper on both ends because you're going to cover it with a mylar tubing. But here's what you do if you were going to do the lead foil type of body. You take an adhesive backed lead foil. It's got this white release paper on it. You cut it to the size you want. And what you want for a size is something that goes from the bend, the point, towards the eye, just about the same distance of what your lead wire would do. But you crease this foil to establish a crease that would, when you fold it on it, covers about half the gap in depth. And then you open this back up so you can get that release paper off there. If I can get this in and spread this, there we go. And you get your thumbnail in there and peel this release paper off. And once you got that release paper off, you put this back on, squeeze the adhesive surfaces together, and get a big old gummy pair of scissors you don't worry too much about, and cut this lead foil to shape. You just make a cut here going towards the rear, and now you just change your angle and cut towards the front, and this is what you want to end up with for an overall shape. And you're going to cover this with this mylar tubing, because I got to get this cotton out of this mylar tubing so I can slide the tubing over, and then I got to tie the tubing at the rear of the hook. And I'll show you how to get the tubing out and how to get this stuff on to the hook a little further on in the video. But let me show you the knot in the back. You see this whip finish tool and this much bigger whip finish tool. Well, these bigger ones were designed to reach to the back of a hook, and they work very well if you're just building bodies up ahead of time, or you're building a body that doesn't have a zonker strip on the top of it. If you got a zonker strip on top, you have to use a different technique to tie back here, and I'm going to show you that later on. But you can see this whip finish tool is very long. It'll reach back on even a much larger hook than this, and do this kind of knot if you need it done at the rear of the hook. Now we got to fasten this tubing at the front, and you kind of pull it towards the front so that it stretches out over that lead foil and gives you this swelled chest bait fish look that you're trying to achieve. Now I've established where the eye is and where I want to tie this off, so I just go ahead and cinch that down, pulling opposite directions in my thread so it doesn't spin the mylar tubing, and trim that off and tie that back. Now this is a kind of a close-up of what you're going to get for a finished body shape, and you can see how nice this mylar tubing is as far as imitating the effect of scales. And there's your swelled chest, that bait fish look that people like to have. But let's go back to our original fly with the method that Skip Morris uses of using lead wire to weight it. And you grab this cotton core stuff and you just slide it out like this. This just twisted wire, it's twisted cotton as a core, and it's of no real value to us. And you cut this tubing off so it's a little longer than your hook, and slide it right on over the eye. So you just push this in. You don't worry too much about those ends that are unraveling. They're actually left on there for a tail. Some people do trim them off and tie them, or tie the end of the mylar tubing down so that you get a kind of a head shape here in the back. But it's more common and more popular, and the original pattern called for that mylar to be left sticking out the back. So this is a thing that Skip Morris does different than everybody else when he ties these. He leaves that bobbin that's in the back now. He leaves that hanging there through the rest of the fly and uses a second bobbin to tie everything up at the eye section of the fly. It's a shortcut that he developed as a production tire. It just saved him a lot of changing around and restarting his thread and tying it off back there and then tying it again. So once you get this second bobbin established and onto the material, what you got to do is unravel this front part, and I'll show you a way that some people make a collar on these flies using this mylar tinsel, and then we'll end up trimming it all off because Morris uses a hackle collar on this fly. But you could take this stuff, see, once you got it separated out like this, and just fold it back, tie it down, and it becomes your collar in lieu of a hackle collar. You got it folded back, so you just tie this, wrap up on it a little bit, and there you go. There's a mylar collar that's evenly distributed all the way around the hook. But now that we got it nice and evenly distributed, we're just going to cut it off. You can use the roly-poly technique. You don't cut everything above the hook, so you aren't worried about cutting your thread. And you see that bobbin in the back there, it just kind of hangs up on that hook while you're making rotations like this, and then just comes back off when you come back down around. So it's really not a problem having that hanging back there, even using the rotary features of your vise. So I'll just kind of shape this a little bit now that I got it where I wanted and I see there are no problems with it. And we'll tie the hackle on that's going to be used for the collar. Now use a grizzly hackle dyed olive. This is a hen back here, and size it against the hook. I want these barbel lengths to be about half the length of the shank, so I just hold it to the back of the hook there so I can establish that this feather is big enough. I'll trim the butt off, and then I trim these fibers on the bottom off and tie this in sticking out over the eye of the fly. Then I'll tie it in very close to the eye and wrap the tying wraps back towards the body. So I get up there close to the eye, set this thing in place, just hold it with my thumbnail and trap it, pull it back a little bit and hold it in place, and just wrap now towards the bend. Once I get back far enough and I think I've got it secure, I'll just trim this butt end off, bend this hackle out, and I can grab it with my hackle pliers, but I'll wrap it by hand because I got these two bobbins hanging down. I don't want to be rotating my vise, but I will rotate over to make it easier to get at my feather. And I'll just make 5 to 7 wraps going back towards the bend, going back to where my thread is hanging. Get that bobbin out of the way. And there's 5 or so wraps. And I'll just come up with my thread, trap that tip. Now this is another thing that Morris does different. He wrapped this back towards the bend so that he could trap that tip, take these hackle pliers off, and then use the thread to wrap through the hackle to make this a lot more durable fly. The more times you can wrap something through hackle and protect that hackle from breaking, the more durable your end result is going to be. So you wrap through to the front, and once you're out here in the front, you want this to lean back and sweep towards the rear. So you just pull this material back and wrap up on those hackle barbels, and you can get the cone shape you want. Now make sure I cut this tip out before I do anything more. Yeah, looks good. It's nice even wrap all the way around. So I'm just going to pull these fibers to the rear and wrap up on them, wrapping back about a distance that would be equal to the size of my eye. So just wrap up on those, shape this a little bit, and you see I start to get my cone shape that I want. with those sweeping to the rear. Now all we got to do is put a Zonker strip on here, and we'll be done. And you can see these Zonker fibers lean towards the rear, and that's what we want. And we want to pull the hair off the very front of the strip, just a short distance of it, and cut this to a point. And this point helps us have a tapered head and gives you a chance to very securely tie this Zonker strip on. Some people add glue at this point and then tie the Zonker strip in with glue underneath it. But this method of tying them on works just fine. You just trap it with your thumbnail. And I'm going to make a wrap on here and then make some wide wraps going towards the eye. That one going backwards now towards the eye. Another one. And now I just wrap really tightly. I'm really pulling on this thread now as tightly as I can to bind that tip on. And that Zonker strip ought to stay, especially where we're going to tie it in the rear. So I check, I do my roly-poly and look and make sure everything's okay with my fly. My distribution on my hackle is still good, and it is. And so I'm just going to go ahead and shape my head. Cover up any pieces of hide that are peeking out through from under the wraps. And whip finish this off. And of course you could still be using that great big whip finish tool. I've switched back to a smaller one, but the big tool does have the advantage of being able to reach to the bend of the hook and also certainly tie up by the eye. Okay, so let's put our attentions back on the rear of the hook and see if we can finish this fly off. Now I'll use this copper wire instead of that bigger whip finish tool. Skip Morris in his book uses monofilament 5X. I like to use the copper wire because I usually have copper wire on my desk, my tying desk, but I don't always have 5X monofilament back there. But the concept and technique is the same. And this is a shortcut he came up with for tying these knots in the back of the hook without having to use a whip finish tool back here or without having to do a bunch of half hitches. So I'm going to establish where my tie-in point is, bring my bodkin needle in here to lift up these fibers, wet my fingers and stroke these fibers towards the front. And with that tie-in point established, you just go ahead and wrap over this. Now I'll use my thumbnail here. See how it wants to curl that rabbit strip up? But if you get your thumbnail in there and push on the corner of it, you can push it back down. And it looks good on this side too. And before I fasten everything down to finish it up though, let me cut the Zonker strip off to length and get rid of some of this excess material back here. So I just use my scissor point to pick up the ends so I don't cut off that hair, and I cut just a little beyond the mylar, unraveled mylar tail that I have. And so let's fasten this down good and tight, and we'll tie this knot back here using Skip's technique that he developed to help him. Again, he was a production tire, or is a production tire, and this is just the kind of things you develop if you tie a lot of these to make things go quicker. And I like to roll this hook over so I don't have to deal with that Zonker strip wing. You take 3 or 4 strips over your monofilament, or in my case here, this copper wire. And we're just going to cut this thread and stick it through the wire or monofilament loop. So I get some loose thread up here, hold the tip of my bobbin in my fingertips so it doesn't drop to the floor. Cut that off, stick it into my loop, pull it up here, get that extra hair out of there. There we go. Grab the wire, pull, and pull that thread right underneath the 3 or 4 wraps that I made. And now I just really cinch this down. You watch, I'll pop this thread several times here, just yanking on it, trying to get it to cinch tight. The tighter the better. And of course you would cement this back here also to make it that much stronger. And there you go. You got a Zonker now. Very good, very effective fly. I tie this in a variety of colors, and certainly this coloration scheme that Skip Morris has is a great imitation of baby bass. And there you go. There's a Zonker fly tied using rotary fly tying techniques and some shortcuts from Skip Morris on Tying Flies, a 2006 book.